Now we're going to talk about adolescents' cognitive development. So let's start with some neuroscience. There are a lot of changes happening in the brain in adolescence. The brain's gray matter thickens and expands, mostly in the frontal lobe. Remember, that's the last one to stop developing. The white matter that connects the brain's different regions is still developing, and it's not yet reliable. So the gray matter are the neurons themselves, the white matter is the myelination. Remember, myelination is the insulation that makes everything work more efficiently. So until 19 or 20, new nerve cells lack a full coat of myelin, which makes connections more efficient. So we see still developing myelin in adolescence, and until that's done developing, the brain isn't at its most efficient. So hot versus cold thinking. Because of the lack of myelin, this means that strong emotions tend to get stuck in the amygdala rather than moving to the frontal cortex, where they can be processed with logic and reason. Okay, so this difference is hot versus cold thinking. So in cold thinking, you don't have a lot of emotions running through your brain. You can stop, you can be logical about them. But hot thinking is in a moment of high emotions or high stress or high pressure. And it's hard for the adolescent brain to think logically when those hot emotions are running through their brain. And because they lack this ability, that can help explain the impulsive nature of teenagers. It can help explain their emotional volatility and their immature judgment. You can think of it as in their brain the buildings are all there, but the roads aren't completed yet. So when you run a scenario by adolescents while they're in a state of cold thinking, they can approach the problem logically and come up with good decisions. But when teenagers are in a state of high emotion, they cannot think logically, and they will probably make poor decisions. They're very bad at this hot thinking. Gender differences. During middle childhood, the influence of different brain structures in boys' and girls' brains begins to manifest. Girls tend to spend more time in bonding activities, and then they take the lead in language and learning skills, whereas boys are more active and physical, and usually have better perceptual and spatial skills. So this was going to lead to a class discussion, and I'll post this up on Blackboard. So what are some reasons why girls spend more time in bonding and boys are more active and physical? I want you to consider evolutionary reasons and cultural reasons, and I will post this discussion up on Blackboard. Now to move on to Piaget. We are now in his fourth stage of development called formal operations, and two abilities really define this stage. The first is hypothetical deductive reasoning. Hypothetical deductive reasoning is the ability to use deductive reasoning to systematically eliminate variables, reach conclusions based on the effects of those variables. Okay, so you can think of this as just scientific thinking. So let's break that down into its two parts. The first is hypothetical thinking. This is considering what might be, not just what is. They can think beyond their immediate experience. They can try out different outcomes in their minds. They don't have to see it like children in concrete operations did. The second part is scientific reasoning. They can draw conclusions based on evidence. They can manipulate variables in an experiment to isolate their effects. They can really do true scientific thought at this stage. The second big thing is abstract thought. Now they can classify symbols, not just concrete objects. Adolescents in formal operations can contemplate intangible things and possibilities. We talked about how symbolic thinking appeared in toddlers, but we really start to see it mature in adolescence. So children, even in elementary school, can understand and manipulate symbols such as letters and numbers. Remember, numbers are a symbol. But now think about algebra and the elusive x. X is a letter, but it no longer represents a letter. It represents something else. It represents an unknown, a variable. It can be anything. So until about 11 or 12, children can be taught the mechanics of solving for x, but they don't fully understand it. They can follow the process and come up with the right answer, but they really don't understand what they're doing. Geometry is full of abstract concepts and symbols. For instance, points that have no dimension, lines that continue for infinity, etc. So higher level maths are full of this abstract thought that middle childhood children just can't grasp. We need adolescents and formal operations to get them. Part of this is also subjectivity. They can think about things like truth, fairness, and justice, really abstract concepts. But they can also realize that those things can mean something different to different people. This is subjectivity. They realize that things can have different meanings depending on how you look at it. So the effects of formal operations on language. Okay? Formal operations leads to new tools in language, such as sarcasm, the ability to understand that something said a different way has a different meaning. It's not just the meaning of the words. They can also really understand metaphors. These are figures of speech in which one thing stands for another. In middle childhood, they can start to grasp metaphors, but it's really in adolescence that we see real understandings of it. Metaphors aren't just used in poetry or literature. We use metaphors every day. We have idioms that we use every day that are technically metaphors. Hanging by a thread, jumping to conclusions, raining cats and dogs, look before you leap. We use these things all the time. These are symbolic phrases, and in adolescence they can truly understand them. They can also now understand what are called double entendres. These are words that can mean different things at the same time. We see these in a lot of jokes where words can have more than one meaning depending on how you think about it. You see these a lot in the "that's what she said" jokes. So it's just words that have more than one meaning at the same time. And in formal operations, people can begin to understand those. So Piaget had a test to measure scientific thinking in children. It was the pendulum problem. So he would give children of different ages weights and strings of various sizes. So you see here, this is a pendulum swinging. He gives them strings of different sizes, weights of different weights. And he asks them to determine what causes the pendulum to swing at different rates. What makes it swing faster or slower? Is it the weight, the length of the string, the height from which the weight is dropped, or the force with which the weight was pushed? So children still in concrete operational thought are not good at systematically testing the variables. They'll try a few things in random combinations, and then they'll make a conclusion based on what they saw. But adolescents in formal operations will test all of the variables in all the combinations. They'll follow the ideas of scientific reasoning. They'll change one variable while holding the others constant. So for instance, they'll choose one length of string and then drop it from the same height with different weights, and then they'll change a weight and repeat the process. They can systematically isolate the variables, and they can usually draw the right conclusion. So here's your quest. What's the answer to the pendulum problem? Okay, what makes the pendulum swing faster or slower? Is it the weight, the length of the string, the height from which the weight is dropped, or the force with which the weight was pushed? So find the answer for me. Tell me what it is. I'll give you some XP. If you can show me that you did the experiment yourself instead of just doing a Google search, I'll give you some extra. Okay. The reappearance of egocentrism. In many ways, adolescents are like toddlers. We do see a return to the egocentrism, but it takes a slightly different form in adolescence. They're not egocentric in the same way as toddlers. So here are some things that classify adolescent egocentrism. So the first is the imaginary audience. Part of being able to consider what may be can lead to elaborate fantasies, such as becoming a rock star. They think that everybody is watching them, usually criticizing them. They believe that other people are concerned with their appearance and behavior. So the obsession with looking in the mirror seems to peak in the 8th grade and then tends to decline. But they feel like when they walk into the room, everybody's looking at them, everyone's judging their appearance, their clothes. Okay, everybody's watching me all the time. They think my thoughts and feelings are important to everyone around me. It's like they're the star and everybody's watching them. Second is the personal fable. Again, they're the star of their own movie. They think no one has ever had these thoughts before. I'm brilliant. I'm original. This is why they say to their parents, like, you couldn't possibly understand me. They think that everything they think and feel is new and original. And part of this personal fable is the illusion and invulnerability. So they think nothing can hurt me. I'm invincible. Bad things happen to other people. This leads them to risky behavior such as drinking, drugs, and unprotected sex that we talked about last time. Okay, so they know the risks of these things. If you ask them about it, they can tell you the risks of drugs and risky behavior and unprotected sex. In fact, they even they tend to judge these behaviors as more risky than adults would judge the same behavior. The problem is they think that even though those risks exist, it couldn't happen to them. They are somehow immune to those risks. Again, bad things happen to other people, not to me. There is a reason why military recruiters look for 18 and 19-year-olds. These are the people who believe I can go to war, I can learn to fight, nothing bad will happen to me. So some criticisms of Piaget. He overestimated adolescents and adults. He assumed that all adolescents enter formal operations, but only 50 to 60% of 18 to 20-year-olds actually use formal operations. This is based on a study that was done in the 1980s. So only about half of college students have actually entered what Piaget considered formal operations. Later in his career, Piaget speculated that all adults are capable of reasoning at the formal operational level, but they only do so when solving problems that hold their interest or are vital to them personally. If it's not something interesting to them, they tend to use more primitive strategies to solve problems. Also, formal operations are not all or nothing, like Piaget thought. Some formal operations are more likely to develop in some cultures than others. Essentially, you get what you need. You get the aspects of formal operations that you need to survive in your culture. So children raised in households that use a lot of sarcasm will develop that ability earlier than children in households who don't use it. Technology-oriented cultures have people who develop more scientific reasoning. It's more important for them to be able to use scientific reasoning than in other cultures. Also, not all of formal operations develop simultaneously. People get them separately or may have some, but not all. So I just want you to think about it. Do you know an adult who just doesn't get sarcasm, who doesn't understand metaphors, who can't think scientifically? We all probably know someone like this, just someone who hasn't fully entered formal operations. We will continue this topic in the next video.